Let's get one thing straight. RuneScape is extremely weird, and what's even weirder are the bugs and glitches that we as a community have just accepted as game mechanics. That may seem like a very loaded introduction, so let's make this easy and take it one step at a time. As RuneScape has progressed, the player base has gotten so good at every task that you can think of. From agility to bossing, the community has continued to push past expectations and start to do some really crazy things. There's no doubt in my mind that challenges like the Inferno and the Colosseum would have sent the entire population into a spiral of impossibility if we dropped it back in, let's say, 2009, simply because we had no idea how certain game mechanics worked. You have to remember, back then the hardest solo challenge was the Fight Caves, where gear looked nothing like it does today, prayer flicking wasn't a thing, and I'm not even sure if we understood pathing correctly. Things like this have become commonplace, and I think it's both weird that we have accepted this as okay, and awesome that we found it in the first place. Like, I can't imagine this is what the game developers had in mind when Ulm was first released. One day, the community became so advanced in understanding ticks and movements to this insane degree that a huge section of the final and hardest boss fight in this raid is done without taking damage. So let's break down this incredibly small list of bugs and glitches that I found and absolutely love that the community has just accepted as mechanics. Before we jump into things, I think it's important to include this little note. I'm in no way promoting, endorsing, or encouraging bug abuse, glitches, or anything of the sort. If you happen to find a bug in the game, make sure to use the report button to let Jagex know what's happening, so something potentially game-breaking doesn't ruin everyone's fun. But what is a bug or a glitch? For the purpose of this video, these terms are going to be used pretty much interchangeably, but to avoid confusion, let's define a glitch or a bug as something that changes the behavior of an interaction that was not intended by the game developers. Something a little bit further past a simple graphical glitch. For example, one day if I walk into this raid and see Ulm is bright red for no reason, it may sound pretty cool and fun, but there's no change in behavior. There are, of course, plenty of situations in which the community has intentionally created a weird behavioral mechanic that benefits the player that the game developers more than likely didn't intend on being the case. The first one that comes to mind is prayer flicking. Everyone knows and loves their prayers. It makes Slayer AFK, bosses possible, and increases DPS to an incredible degree. But it's on a time restriction. When a prayer is active, prayer points will slowly deplete, eventually hitting 0 unless of course you turn off that prayer, restore it with potions, pools, dying, going to an altar. There's a lot of ways to restore your prayer, but depending on which prayer you use, prayer ticks away faster than others. A high level prayer like Augury ticks down prayer a whole lot faster than a low level prayer like Rapid Heal. You can of course decrease the speed in which prayer ticks away by wearing prayer armor, but what if there is a way to keep prayers active forever, allowing you to gain both those benefits of prayers while never draining your prayer reserve? That is prayer flicking. There are a couple different variations of prayer flicking, such as lazy flicking. In combat, there's a ton of downtime between attacks, regardless if you're the one doing the damage or the monster you're fighting. Such is the case here. I send an attack, the monster eventually hits me back, and then I send my attack again. This entire time my prayer is getting drained because I'm leaving it on, but if I turn off my prayer and turn it on right before the monster attacks me, I gain protection from that attack, and then I can turn it off when he isn't sending an attack my way, saving me a whole lot of prayer points. This is lazy flicking, and once you practice enough, you can eventually get to the point where you can one-tick prayer flick. This essentially is the final form of the bug, if you will. By clicking this orb, or of course your prayers at certain times, you can forever preserve your prayer points, keeping the benefits on forever, or until your wrist locks up and carpal tunnel sets in. This has been in the game for a very, very long time. It makes certain achievements even possible. Something like the Fight Caves challenge, No Time for a Drink, which can only be achieved if you've mastered the one-tick prayer flick, or you're doing something else. Something like number 2 on this list, tick eating. If you thought the last explanation was nerdy, I'm going to take this up to a new level. First thing we gotta know is what is tick eating. Let's say you find yourself in this situation. We are in prime chaos here, and I just got hit down to 6 HP at the very beginning of the Warden fight. My goal is to try to kill this pillar when the 2 guardians on either side of me send an unavoidable orb my way. When this orb hits me, it's guaranteed to do enough damage to kill me. After all, 6 HP isn't hard to hit, and this orb can't miss. Now, there's 2 options in this situation. Since prayers don't protect against this attack, I can either start chugging the brew right now and pray that I heal up enough to avoid dying. Which is probably not going to be the case, as this orb hits like a truck and is going to do way more damage than I can possibly heal in a short amount of time. Option 2 is actually waiting until the perfect time to eat. Let's watch. A 7. I got hit a 7, and I'm back up to 16 HP. Like, how did I even do that? Not a minute ago, this exact orb hit me well above that. So why did it only hit a 7 this time? This is where I get to talk about how damage and when damage is calculated in the game against a player. When a player is attacked by a monster, or in this case an orb, there's a certain tick in which the game decides how much to hit that player. In this case, the orb cannot hit a 0 and is in fact guaranteed to kill the player when they're sitting at this low of HP. What is happening first is the orb is going to check my remaining health and then decide how much to hit, and in this case, it's going to hit for my total health. Again, in this example, it landed on number 7, as in this exact moment, 7 is the amount of HP that I have. The orb, like I mentioned before, cannot miss and has a minimum amount that it's going to try to hit, and it's well above 7 damage. So let's say it's at 40. So it's going to try to hit that minimum amount of 40, but since I only have 7 HP, it's going to cap itself at 7 damage. However, there is a brief moment in which the player can do something, heal up some of their HP. In essence, ticky. If I know when the damage is going to be calculated, and if I can eat in between that damage calculation and when the damage is actually applied to my player, I can survive. This can be done with any food or healing option. In this situation, I just happen to have a Saradomin brew, but this would have worked if I had a shark, tuna, or even a purple sweet, which has a chance to heal me up only 1 HP. It doesn't really matter. As long as I'm able to heal up some HP before the damage is given to me, I can survive. This is beyond easier said than done, as each monster and each attack has different times on when the damage calculation is done and when it's applied to the player. With the orb example, this calculation is done when the orb is roughly at the player's head. In the incredibly brief time between that visual cue and when the damage is calculated, I am able to sip that brew and heal up to avoid dying. Now, this situation doesn't present itself that often, or at least for me. If you play like me, I always heal up to full whenever I have the option because I really hate dying and I miss this tick all the time. But there is another bug that I use quite often, and it involves player movement. This is where I'm going to really stretch the word bug, as these mechanics that I'm going to be talking about have been heavily leaned into by the community and Jagex. What I'm talking about is forcing interactions between player and opponent based on the player movement. This type of interaction makes something like corner trapping, solo ohm, and red X possible. While the movement in the ohm fight and corner trapping may not exactly be a bug in the game, I really don't think this is what the developers intended when creating some monsters. For example, back in 2007 or 2013 when the release of Old School RuneScape came out, corner trapping a monster was not common knowledge. Throwing arrows over a fence or a wall for sure and they can attack you back, but something like this was definitely not well known. The coding of a monster and how they move towards a player is very intentional. A monster will always try to line up its southwest tile to the player. As coded, the monster will close the distance, prioritizing moving east and west over north and south. So when they are within that last tile of the player, monsters will continue to prioritize moving east and west instead of taking that last step north, or in this situation, south. This is intentional and allows corner trapping to work. However, at least back in the day, and in my opinion, I don't really think the developers expected players to use this movement so extensively to gain an advantage. But today, this mechanic has been leaned into so hard by the player base, learning the Inferno may not be possible without understanding how movement and corner trapping works. Regardless, in situations like in the Ohm fight, by moving at certain ticks, a player can avoid damage entirely during this fight and still apply damage to the boss. For a very simple breakdown of this fight, Ohm looks at the room in 3 different ways. The first is when he's looking straight ahead, only seeing this section of the room. He can turn his head to the right, giving him this section of the room that he can look at, or if he moves left, it's going to be this section of the room. If the player times their movement correctly, they're able to always be out of sight of Ohm while doing damage to his hands. Now, since Ohm has this built-in mechanic to move his head around to possibly share the damage around the room when doing this raid in groups, it may not exactly be a bug, but what you may consider a bug is the red X method. Now, this is not exactly a super common method. The only 2 times that I can actually think that I've personally used this extensively is at Baba and at Zammy's at the God Wars dungeon. So, what is the red X? According to the wiki, red X is a method by which players are able to delay one-range attacks from monsters in certain circumstances by moving in a particular way. By moving a tile by interacting with an object, such as dropped items or an altar, causes different behavior than moving by selecting walk here on a tile. The interaction, which behaves differently, causes the player cursor to have a red X when clicking rather than a yellow X, giving the method its name. What this red X does is changes the way monsters behave when a player is underneath them. Back at my Giants example, if I highlight their hitbox, we can see that if I stand underneath this monster, it will move in a way to get me, the player, out from underneath it. If I drop some items around here and click them, causing a red X, I'm able to freely walk underneath the monster and he's not going to move at all. This interaction between player and monster forces extremely favorable situations. At Zammy, it makes it so I can path under him and avoid getting hit entirely. Same thing happens at Baba. I'm able to move underneath her without her moving, allowing me to abuse her stomp mechanic and let me get damage on her for free. Now, as far as I'm aware, the red X mechanic is in fact intentional by Jagex. Like demonstrated with the giant, if I stand underneath them, they're going to try to path around so I'm not underneath them anymore. However, when the red X wasn't a thing, if I stood underneath the monster and tried to eat something and I clicked back on the monster to try to hit them, me and the monster would move at the same time in a very janky way. Without red X stopping the monster from moving, you could end up in a situation where the monster and you are trying to path out from underneath one another but never getting away from one another, causing you two to pretty much just dance. So Jagex added this intentional mechanic to stop the monster to prevent this from happening. Now, like I said, these mechanics are intentional by Jagex, so whether you classify them as bugs or not, players have used these mechanics in unintentional ways to gain an advantage during an encounter like Zammy or Baba, something, once again, I don't think the developers intended. What has been addressed as a glitch and is acceptable though is the final entry on this list, tick manipulation. This is where those super high mining and hunter XP screenshots come from. Written on the wiki and addressed by Mod Ash on Twitter, X, whatever it actually is, most forms of tick manipulation are technically glitches or bugs but have been deemed balanced by the Jagex team due to the extra effort needed to pull them off. This final entry actually includes prayer flicking and tick eating, as they are indeed forms of tick manipulation. However, the term tick manipulation encompasses way more. For example, combo eating. Food and potions are normally consumed on a 3-tick basis, but you can change some food combinations to be eaten at the same tick, allowing for way more health to be gained in that short amount of time. Another example would be the run trick. When the player is walking, they hit every tile in that path. However, when a player runs, they skip tiles. This allows players to skip past dangerous encounters like at the Rogue's Den. That's right, I remember this god-awful place. This is a super fast and simple example, but in this stretch of the den, players had to avoid stepping on these traps. You can of course right-click each trap and search the tile and hope that it's safe for you to stand on, or you could just stand here, take a step here, and then run straight out of the room, avoiding all dangerous known tiles. There are thousands of different examples on this trick, but when I think of tick manipulation, I mainly think about skilling skips. If you're fast enough to execute enough actions within a game tick, you're able to interrupt animations to optimize different skills for insane XP per hour when compared to doing it the normal way. Let's showcase cooking, as it's super simple to pull off. When you normally cook something, you take the raw form of the food, in this case it's going to be sharks, click on the fire or range and select how many you want to cook, and then watch your character do an animation when they're cooking, eventually seeing that finished product popped up in your inventory. You could, however, click on the shark in the range, open up that prompt screen, and hold down the spacebar to automatically select a cooking option. When you do this, you can click back and forth on raw food in the range, skipping the entire animation that you would normally see, cooking way faster. This is a very simple form of tick manipulation, and the wiki page shows a ton of different manipulation tactics being pulled off. These animation skips allow for some insane XP rates at the cost of your fingers. So what do you think? Do you think some of these bugs need to be patched? Do you think these are good for the game? Or do you know of any other bugs that I didn't cover that we've just accepted as game mechanics? I'd love to hear your thoughts about the subject, as I just love learning more about this game. Regardless, that's all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really does mean the world to me. Until we see each other again, I hope everyone's having a fantastic day. Good luck on your grinds and your personal goals, and I hope to see you again very soon. Stay inspired.